1. The glow. She is the most alive person in the room, and that should be your first clue. Not happy exactly, alive. Like someone who has just walked out of a building that was on fire and discovered, to her own surprise, that she still has eyebrows. There's a brightness to a woman fresh out of a marriage, a kind of high-voltage attention she pays to everything. The food, the music, your hands, the fact that you laughed at the thing she said in the parking lot. You will mistake this for chemistry. Some of it is, most of it is decompression. You meet her and she is funny in that specific way people get funny right after they've survived something. She tells you a story about her wedding cake that should be sad and somehow isn't. And you think, finally, an adult. Someone who has been through it. Someone who knows what marriage costs and chose to walk into a room with you anyway. There is nothing more flattering on this earth than being chosen by a person who has every reason to never choose again. And the intimacy comes fast. After years inside a marriage where the lights went off emotionally a long time before anyone filed the paperwork, being wanted again hits her like weather. Being touched again, feeling wanted again, after a marriage where intimacy disappeared, that energy can come roaring back in ways that surprise people, and it bonds two people very quickly. You feel it too. You tell yourself you've never had anything like this. You might even be right. What nobody tells you is that the glow is not a forecast, it's an aftermath. The same way a sunset is just light bending through a lot of dust, the radiance you're standing in is made partly of relief, partly of grief, and partly of the dawning realization, hers, not yet yours, that she is free. You think you're falling in love with a woman. You are actually falling in love with a season. 2. The woman in the data. Here's who she statistically is, in case you'd like to know before your heart finishes deciding. She probably ended it herself. Women initiate roughly 69% of all divorces, according to the Stanford study by Michael Rosenfeld. And this is one of the most robust findings in all of divorce research, remarkably consistent for over 80 years. So whatever story she tells you about how it fell apart, understand that in most cases, she was the one who finally said the sentence out loud. She didn't drift out of a marriage, she climbed out. She is also, by the numbers, fine. This is the part that bruises male ego in the dark. Despite short-term economic difficulties, women tend to experience long-term improvements in well-being after divorce, and only a small percentage regret the decision compared to men. You are not rescuing her. You walked in after the rescue. She did that part herself, probably in a lawyer's office, probably while you were watching a game. The marriage that ended likely lasted a while. The median length of marriages ending in divorce reached 12 years in 2023. 12 years. That's a decade plus of inside jokes, mortgage logins, and a particular way someone breathes next to you at night. You are not competing with a villain. You are competing with muscle memory. And she is not rare. There were 986,810 divorces in 2024. Nearly 1 million people that year alone walking back into the world, looking exactly the way she looked when she walked toward you. Roughly the population of a mid-sized American city, all newly single, all glowing, all dangerous in the same beautiful way. The reassuring lie people tell is that half of marriages fail. The truer figure is that about 40 to 45% of first marriages end in divorce. The 50% number was a projection from the late 1970s that never actually materialized. Cold comfort. Because the relevant statistic was never the marriages, it's the second acts. Nearly 60% of second marriages end in divorce, and that climbs to around 73% for third marriages, which means the woman you're falling for has decent odds of leaving someone again. You're just hoping it isn't you. 3. The ghost at the table. There is a third person in your relationship, and he doesn't even know your name. You'll meet him slowly. A pause before she answers a certain question. The way she flinches at a phrase you didn't realize was loaded. A whole category of restaurants she won't go to. You'll be 3 months in before you understand that you have been carefully, lovingly steered around an entire map of landmines someone else planted. The ex is not gone. The ex is furniture now. He's the reason she keeps her own bank account with a slightly defensive tone in her voice. He's why she said we'll see instead of yes when you suggested a trip. He shaped a decade of her reflexes, and reflexes don't read divorce decrees. Emotional attachment doesn't vanish instantly. It's a slow progression, and the heart needs time to heal rather than jump into a new relationship. So you get compared. Not cruelly, usually not even out loud, but constantly. When someone is still healing, they continually compare the ex to the new partner, and even if it's never spoken aloud, the new partner can feel the emotional disconnect. You'll do something thoughtful and watch a strange expression cross her face, and you'll realize she's not reacting to you. She's reacting to a man who didn't do this for 11 years, and you've just accidentally won a fight you weren't in. Other times you'll lose one the same way. You'll be late, you'll forget to text back, and the size of her reaction won't match the size of your crime because you're not being scored against your own record. This is a trigger loop. Your partner reacts not to the present, but to past hurts, like becoming anxious when you're late because of a fear of being hurt again. Less about the current situation than about the old wound. The forums are full of men and women who learned this the hard way. People who dated someone fresh out of a marriage and discovered the marriage had simply moved in with them. One woman described dating a man still in love with his ex, openly jealous of who she was dating now, who hadn't even covered up the tattoo of his ex-wife's name. The body keeps the receipts. You wanted a partner. For a while, you're also a defendant, a rebound, and a rough draft of the next chapter, all at once, all unpaid. Love her, sure. Just understand you're the second person to sit in this chair, and the first one left a dent. 4. The guard. The walls go up exactly when things start going well. That's the cruelest part of the timing. You'll have a perfect weekend, the kind you replay on the drive to work, and then she'll go quiet for 2 days, and you'll spiral trying to figure out what you did. You did nothing. You did too well. You got close enough that her nervous system pulled the emergency brake. When someone is still dealing with heartbreak, holding back vulnerability is a natural protection against being hurt again, and it creates a push-pull behavior they can't seem to control. This is the dance you've signed up for. Closeness, then retreat. Warmth, then a strange administrative coolness, like you've been temporarily downgraded to acquaintance. A partner carrying this kind of baggage may struggle with trust even when there's no clear reason for it, question intentions, and feel uneasy about commitment. Not as a reflection of anything you did, but as the lingering effect of an old betrayal. You will start narrating your own innocence preemptively. Hey, just so you know, I'm at my brother's. Here's a photo of my brother. You have become a man submitting evidence in a trial with no judge, and you'll be tempted to fix it, to outlove the doubt, to be so consistent, so transparent, so relentlessly safe that the guard finally comes down. Noble, exhausting. Here's the thing they don't print on the box. The most common mistake is pretending to trust again without actually doing the work to rebuild it. Both people shoving the unresolved fear way down and moving on like it didn't happen. You can't reassure someone out of a wound. You can only stand near it while they decide whether it's safe to set it down. There's a quieter cost too, and it's yours. After a few months of being the calm, the proof, the steady one, you'll notice you've stopped saying when you're hurt. You've appointed yourself the emotionally stable one in a 2-person operation, which sounds heroic until you realize it means you no longer have anywhere to put your own bad days. You came in wanting a partner. Somewhere along the way you accepted a promotion to safe harbor. Nobody asked how the harbor was feeling. 5. The kids and the calendar. You don't date her. You join a household that was already running before you got the password. If she has kids, and statistically the children are usually with her, since about 80% of custodial parents are mothers, then you are not the center of anything. You are an item on a calendar that has other, louder items. There is a custody schedule, and that schedule is the actual god of this relationship. It decides when she's free, when she's frayed, when she disappears for a week, and when she resurfaces exhausted because the handoff went badly in a Target parking lot again. You will learn the rhythm of 2-track time. Her week splits into the half where the kids are home and you barely exist, and the half where they're at their dad's, and she's suddenly available but quietly grieving the quiet. The rhythm of a divorced parent's life runs on 2 tracks, the one with you and the one kept for the children. And that can be both grounding and humbling when you were hoping for spontaneous weekends or more undivided attention. You'll plan a romantic Friday and get a text at 4 p.m. So sorry, swap week, his thing got moved. You will eat the reservation. You will say it's fine. It will mostly be fine. And the ex isn't an ex here. He's a coworker she'll have for the next 18 years. Co-parenting means she is in regular, logistical, low-grade contact with the man she divorced. About pickups, fevers, cleats, the dentist. You'll watch her name light up on his text and feel something you're ashamed of. It's not that she still wants him, it's that he is permanently, structurally in the room, and you are the one who has to be cool about it. Meeting the kids is its own minefield, which is why the sane version comes slowly, if it comes at all. The good news is the bet is worth making. Research from the University of Nebraska-Kearney and the University of Texas at Austin found that repartnering after divorce is linked to better psychological and physical health outcomes. A good partner genuinely helps. But helping and belonging are different addresses, and you may spend a long time at the first one. You wanted to be her person. For now, you're her favorite item on a schedule run by a court order and a 9-year-old soccer league. Romance has a season, custody has a calendar. Guess which one wins? 6. The money nobody mentions. Here is the sentence that ends more post-divorce relationships than infidelity ever will. If I remarry, I lose it. Divorce is not just an emotional event in America. It's a financial instrument, and it doesn't always close when the marriage does. If she's receiving spousal support, your fairy tale has a clause. In most states, including California, Georgia, New York, and Texas, the obligation to pay alimony automatically ends the moment the recipient remarries. Automatically. No hearing. The vows you're daydreaming about would, in the eyes of the state, be a voluntary pay cut. So you propose, someday, picturing a ring and a beach, and she's picturing a spreadsheet. It isn't that she doesn't love you. It's that love now comes with an invoice attached, and a lawyer somewhere built it that way on purpose. As one divorce firm puts it bluntly, do you want to risk losing your alimony because you fell in love? And moving in together doesn't dodge it. In some states, the trap is wider than marriage. In states including Illinois, North Carolina, and Texas, a recipient's cohabitation alone can end the obligation to pay spousal support, which means the most ordinary romantic next step, let's just live together, can quietly cost her money every month. You'll suggest combining apartments to save on rent. She'll go strangely still. You'll think it's commitment fear. It might be arithmetic. This is the part of modern love nobody mood boards. The wedding industry sells you forever. The family law system prices it by the month. Financial issues are cited in about 24% of divorces to begin with. Money helped end her marriage, and now money has opinions about whether she's allowed to start a new one. To be fair, she may not need rescuing at all. Divorced women are actually more likely to be employed than women in their first marriage, 76% versus 71%. Plenty walk away and build something steadier than what they left. But, "I'm independent now and I intend to stay that way," is a sentence that can mean I'm strong and don't get too comfortable in the exact same breath. You wanted to give her everything. The state of residence would like a word about the tax implications. In America, even heartbreak comes with a billing department. 7. Bridge or destination. There's one question you've been avoiding since the second date, and it only has 2 answers. Are you the place she's going, or the bridge she's crossing to get there? The research is not gentle about this. In Claudia Brumbaugh's study of 264 people after a breakup, 93% had entered a new relationship. And on average, those relationships lasted about 2 months. 2 months. Long enough to fall, not long enough to land. The first relationship after a divorce has a clinical name, and it's not soulmate. Technically, the first relationship after a divorce is a rebound, and rebounds often involve 2 people who may not be emotionally ready, built on intensity and infatuation, turbulent, and sometimes short-lived. The most haunting warning is the one about repetition. As author Jeanine Lee puts it, dating before you've finished the emotional business of the last relationship almost guarantees you'll choose the same kind of person you just left. Sit with that. If she hasn't done the work, you're not the opposite of her ex. You're the sequel. Same casting, better lighting. But here's where the data refuses to let you fully despair, and that's almost worse because it keeps the hope alive. Nicholas Wolfinger of the University of Utah, in a paper literally titled, "Does the Rebound Effect Exist?" found that people who quickly enter new relationships after divorce don't actually have higher breakup rates than those who wait. So it can work. Rebounds become marriages all the time. The fire is real even when the timing is reckless, which leaves you exactly nowhere comforting. You can't know yet. There's no fixed timeline. What matters is emotional readiness, not months on a calendar, and a rebound is when someone dates to avoid loneliness rather than to actually connect. The only honest test is whether she's reaching for you because her life is full and she wants to share it, or because the silence after a marriage is unbearable and you happen to make a wonderful noise. You'll want to ask her directly. You should. But understand she may not know the answer either, because the real timeline isn't the legal divorce date. It's the moment the marriage ended in her mind, and that moment is private, blurry, and sometimes still in progress while she's lying next to you. You're either her future or her field research, and love, cruelly, feels identical in both. 8. What you're actually signing up for. So you stay anyway? Of course you do. Nobody ever read the statistics and then felt less in love. You stay because the glow is intoxicating and the woman underneath it is genuinely extraordinary. Sharpened by what she survived, funnier for it, more honest than people who've never been broken open. There's a specific gratitude in someone who knows exactly how a marriage can rot and is choosing to risk it again with you. That's not nothing. That's arguably the most courageous thing a person can do, and she's doing it while you're worried about a tattoo of some other guy's name. But love her with your eyes open. You are not arriving at the start of her story. You're walking into the second draft with a ghost in the margins, a custody schedule for a spine, a billing department in the basement, and a nervous system that flinches when you get the timing right. The job is not to fix any of it. The job is to be steady enough that, if she is healing, and most women do come out the other side better off, she heals toward you instead of away. Just don't lose yourself doing it. The quiet tragedy of loving someone fresh out of a marriage is the man who becomes so devoted to being the safe harbor that he forgets harbors don't get to go anywhere. Keep your own life. Keep your own friends. Keep one foot on solid ground, not as a threat, but as a fact. Because the version of you she can actually fall for is the one who isn't waiting in a parking lot, eating reservations, auditioning for permanence. Here's the last truth, and it's the one that costs the most to say. You cannot love someone past their healing. You can only be present for it, and presence is not the same as control. Pretending to trust again without doing the work just buries the wound deeper. And that goes for both of you. So fall, if you're going to. Fall with the full invoice in your hand. Falling for a woman fresh out of divorce in America means loving someone who already knows how this can end. And loving her anyway is either the bravest thing you'll ever do or just expensive on-the-job training. The difference, you won't know for about 2 years. By then, you'll either be her husband or her cautionary tale. Pour yourself something. Check the custody calendar first.